The National Cable and Telecommunications Association puts on an event called The Cable Show that features a mix of industry, technology, and policy participants. The Communicators was on site for this year's event in Los Angeles, and today you'll hear from two of the attendees. One of the major topics being discussed this year is how and whether to regulate broadband. We had a chance to talk with Ray Baum, the chairman of the Oregon Public Utility Commission, who spoke with C-SPAN's Susan Swain about federal efforts to expand broadband and how it would affect his state.
Thank you very much for joining us. Well, let me start with your responsibilities in Oregon. Right now there is a big push by both state and federal levels to get broadband to as many households as possible. Can you talk about the challenge of that in Oregon?
Well, the challenge in Oregon is one of geography and the fact that you have remote populations that aren't near any kind of broadband network, and it's difficult to serve those folks when there's only a few of them out there and you have, sometimes hundreds of miles to get there. So the challenge is, where do you determine to go, and where does the business case not justify the investment? That's the place you want to go, is where the industry can't make a business case for doing it. So we're trying to map Oregon like the rest of the country is being mapped, to determine where those areas are so we can focus on those areas and try to figure out a way to serve them in the least cost fashion through the Federal Universal Service Fund and state funds as well.
Okay, a lot of questions come out of that. Let's start with maybe the easy one, which is mapping.
Yeah.
It seems like you will need to figure out a way to do that in order to see where it's needed and then monitor compliance from a regulatory scheme. What are the challenges to mapping, especially in a state with a lot of rural areas?
Well, the first thing you have to do is get the data from the providers that serve those areas, and some of that's proprietary information, so they're kind of reluctant to give it to us. I think we're going to be successful in getting that information, but that's the first key step. Then you have to do surveys on top of that to verify the data given to you by the carriers to make sure it's accurate, and that begins to give you a picture of what you're actually dealing with and where the unserved areas are, and hopefully where the underserved areas. We want to take it to the extra step of also determining what areas have service, but the usage rate is down. People don't see the value proposition, it's too expensive, and some people just don't understand the internet's importance in their life, and we need to work on those issues as well.
That's a philosophical question. I guess some people might decide to live in rural areas because they really don't want all this stuff, and it sounds as though the government's suggesting you gotta have it.
Well, put it very succinctly, if you're not on the internet in the next few years and doing so in a very intuitive manner and really utilizing it, it's going to be as much of a difference to you income-wise as the difference between a high school education versus a college degree. There will be a divide in incomes based upon access to the internet. Now, you can live in rural areas, and I have, being from a rural area, there are folks that don't have phones. There are not very many of them, less than 3 or 4% of the population never got phone service. They don't want it, and they're probably not going to get the internet service either. But we got to give the rest of those folks a chance to be there so they're not left out of this digital boom that's going to bring higher productivity and a better quality of life to most Oregonians and most Americans because of the benefits of broadband, high-speed internet.
Explain why other citizens should fund that.
Well, when you want to go out there and you want to visit these places, you'd like to hook up. And some people still want to be in touch. Some people go to rural places and get out of touch, but a lot of them want to be able to check in with the office, be able to take care of work and do some things, and this allows them to do that while they're there. It's like the same thing as the rural highways. If you want to drive in the rural parts of the country, do you want a nice highway, or do you want a road with pot marks, potholes in it? So this is the same kind of deal. It's that kind of critical infrastructure. But I think those ratepayers should require that there be targeted unserved areas, and that there may need to be a federal benchmark, an amount of money that the consumer should pay in those areas before there's a federal subsidy. And that's part of the federal broadband plan that's being discussed by the FCC.
Well, you mentioned the Universal Service Fund, and it wasn't really created for this kind of use, so there's a big debate going on about how to reform it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's old technology. It's telephone lines, and right now we got a lot of people on the telephone line still, but the majority of the population is moving not only to broadband, but they want it mobile. And this fund has to focus on providing that broadband service where the economic models of the private industry don't make it pay. And that's going to be a challenge. We've got to change that fund from a wireline fund over to a broadband supporting fund and figure out how to do that without doing damage to the existing business models that are already providing broadband service in those high-cost rural areas, and then focus the additional monies on where broadband service is not and see if we can get it there.
Just hearing a panel session here at the convention where some of these issues were discussed with federal level regulators, and they made the point that the thinking is perhaps subsidies for the deployment but not for operations. So a question is, if you manage to get broadband and even Mobi broadband to these areas, there's still a business model issue. So how do you overcome that aspect of it?
Well, they're going to have to step up, and probably somewhere under 10%, 10 to 5% of those areas are going to need some ongoing support to be served because the business model doesn't allow them to charge enough to do it. I mean, the rates would have to be hundreds of dollars. And one of the principles of universal service is keep rates in urban areas and rural areas comparable. They don't have to be the same, they have to be comparable, and that's the public policy behind it. We don't want to price people out of the internet access just because of where they live. And that's why it's going to be a challenge, but there's going to have to be operational money in some areas because there's not going to be enough population in those areas to make it pay on a reasonable basis.
So just to understand from a policy perspective, it has essentially been decided in this country that access to broadband is a right. Because everything you're building suggests that people ought to have it if they want it, ought to get to places.
We've made a public policy choice, or the FCC will make a public policy choice, that the internet is that important as an advanced service that we should have it ubiquitous as possible throughout the country. And that means it's going to have to penetrate rural areas where the business case is not currently made, and that's going to be a challenge to control the cost and do that, and I think they can do it if they target on unserved areas. But in reality, again, if you're not hooked up to the internet, you're going to be left behind in this current environment. It's just that important.
Moving to older businesses, there have been a couple of big business deals in Oregon recently, and including the Verizon landline business and also Quest. I'm wondering what they suggest to you about the future for landline business.
Well, they believe it all rests on keeping the internet service and providing that to the customers at a reasonable rate so they can compete. The challenge of wireline, all wireline companies that don't have a mobile wireless component, is how they're going to do the mobility part without being like an AT&T or Verizon. They have both wireless and wireline divisions there, and they can serve the customer on a bundled basis. So that'll be the challenge with some of those wire companies, is how to avoid line losses that they're suffering from their old phone lines, and how to keep the internet lines they got growing, and that's where they can try to make up their revenues for the loss on the wireline side that they're losing because of people moving to cell phones and essentially dropping their wire lines altogether.
What are the biggest challenges for you as a regulator, and in your state, the chief regulator of this business, with the rapid advance of technology?
Well, we're caught between trying to facilitate it and staying out of its way, because we can never regulate it enough to anticipate what's going to happen, and we don't want to pick winners and losers. So our best option in my mind is we want to be there for consumers that have problems, it's a place to have their complaints resolved, and we want to be there to facilitate competition and encourage competition and try to mitigate the opportunities for there to be abuse of economic power when the networks are controlled by just a few players, and therefore they can exact a higher price from competitors and the consumers than they otherwise would. We'd like the market to take care of that, but there are instances in some particularly high-cost rural areas where there isn't a lot of competition, where we're going to have to probably regulate in those areas on some price mechanism to avoid that from happening. But the hope is that with all this competition, with cable getting in the business and wireless getting in the business and the existing incumbents, the AT&Ts and Verizons and Clearwires, in the urban and suburban areas of the country, let them go at each other. No economic regulation. Let the market decide who the winners and losers are. It's only on the fringes of society, and for those who are poorer, we call it the least, the lost, and the last. The least being the poor, who can't afford it and don't really understand it. The lost are the people that don't see the value in it. They don't know why they should hook up. And then we got the Last, which is on the edges of the network, don't simply have the service. So those are the three things we need to focus on as regulators, and mainly stay out of about 90% of the market to take care of itself. It's that remaining 10% that we got to engage in.
When you listed the technologies, you didn't mention satellite, which has traditionally been the way to reach the far.
And that's probably why the last 5%, satellite's going to be a big play. Satellite is more expensive and has latency issues. It probably can be improved. Right now it's kind of a competitor, but not effective on any kind of bandwidth basis, because the bandwidths are going up to tens and hundreds of megabits. So that requires fiber, I think, to a large degree. I know 4G is coming, but is yet to prove itself. So you've got to have fiber out there, and lots of it, to make sure that this new technology of lots of bandwidth and video conferencing and telehealth and distance learning and all the things that the cable showed here today about how you control your home network from faraway places all requires lots of bandwidth, and right now we don't have that in the country, but I think the private sector is probably the best place to build most of that.
From your perch and your seat in Washington, how does the federal debate over Title II and the FCC chairman's vow for a light touch seem to you?
Well, we watch this from the sidelines as state regulators, but once Comcast decided to sue the FCC in federal court in Washington, D.C., the district court, we knew that was going to be trouble, because the D.C. court treats the FCC very skeptically, and in the past the FCC hasn't been as careful about the record making as they have been. So we view this as a real gamble on the part of the industry, because the federal court could take the FCC's jurisdiction away, forcing the FCC to look at reclassifying broadband and internet under Title II and making it a common carrier. And that's problematic for the industry, but be careful what you do, because you can end up in a place you didn't anticipate, and you could win a battle and lose a war. So now the war has kind of moved to Title II Light, as it's being called, and it's going to be interesting to see how that jurisdictional shift occurs. We would have been happy as regulators with ancillary jurisdiction as long as they were not focused on non-discriminatory access and interconnection access to the internet. We're not excited about content stuff and regulating anything like that, but we also believe that everybody has to be in the game, because the big players here, whether you're Comcast or AT&T or whether you're Google, everybody should be thinking about market power and market control and what's the best way to do that. And right now the private sector has done a good job. There's been a few instances, but they haven't spilled out much, and they've all been corrected. So what they're worried about is that these big players will simply start squeezing the innovators and competitors out of the market, and the big players push back and say, well, no, that deprives us of our investment returns, and we're not going to do that. We need to have reasonable congestion management practices. So all this gets thrown into the lap of the FCC, and state regulators are watching it all settle out, and we just want to remind them of one thing. Remember, the District of Columbia and Alaska are very different. So make sure you leave states and some flexibility in how this all falls out, because the conditions are different throughout this country. So don't cut state regulation out, and make sure at least we're there to protect consumers and to help them on regulating interconnection and things like that.
And the work that you do for the national organizations of regulators, this is the big worry that you have, is being cut out of the process?
Well, because at the end of the day, the federal government, one size does not fit all. The federal government is slower to act on rising consumer issues than state regulators are. We don't want 50 different states doing this. My view is, and this is my personal view, not as NARUC, is we need federal leadership on this, and then have flexibility to allow those standards to be changed to fit the growing concerns that consumers have. But we want to make sure that everyone has the same consumer rights, whether they live in District of Columbia or Alaska or Oregon or Iowa or Hawaii. We all need to be playing, because this is an interstate global service, and we should expect service quality and things like that to be pretty good quality wherever we go, because the internet right now is going to perform all the functions we love about gaming to data downloads, everything, but it also is going to be the place where you're going to call the sheriff. You're going to call the police. You're going to have to get a hold of the emergency services. and it's going to have to fund those things as well. And that's where the industry, I think, is going to step up and take those societal costs on. But the question is how far should the FCC go beyond those basic things towards actually regulating the internet, and that has yet to be determined.
What are the top several complaints that come into the commission, and have they changed over the past 4 or 5 years?
Well, the complaints are always mostly about fees, costs, and the fact that they get dropped off, like the wireless services get dropped off free network, free weekend services, and all of a sudden they're dropped off when the customer has a $600 or $700 phone bill. There's other instances where the customer doesn't believe they get what they bargained for, that the service doesn't actually work in their area. And the industry has gone a long way in providing maps, and it's kind of quick to correct. And there's also this big row about early termination fees. They were charging $200 to change services, and now they're prorating that. So the industry is responding. I'm just not sure if that response is industry generated or generated by regulators, state and federal, who raised the issues. But those are the things they got to be careful of, is sometimes the consumer has a different expectation from the company than what the company actually delivers, and we got to make those mesh as much as possible. And when the consumer is unsatisfied, they have to have a place to go, and they're not going to go to the FCC in Washington, D.C., and they're not going to go to federal district court. State attorney generals only do broad class actions, so the state PUCs need to have a role in settling those complaints, which mostly result in the company being the party in the right. And we need to have some place to park those complaints, and the FCCs and the PUCs in the states are the best place to have that done.
Oregon was one of the states particularly hard hit by the financial crisis. The real estate foreclosure rate has been really high in the state. Has that complicated the telecommunications business and therefore the regulation thereof?
Well, it's hurt the growth that was going on. That obviously it. But the telecommunication business is now...
People unable to pay bills, moving out of houses.
Well, the major complaint at the PUC was utility bills, and we can't pay. And that was mainly aimed at electricity. And we have some complaints about, wireless bills as well, but things are just a lot more expensive, and people don't have the money, they're unemployed in many instances, and so they call the PUC and say, what can you do about my utility bill? And we send them to, the consumer services that provide subsidies and things like that, but there's clearly not enough of that to go around. And so right now we're just kind of, letting people get what they can, but ultimately we're going to have to come out of this recession and people will be better then, but right now it's a tough time for them.
Are you beginning to see any turnaround in the state?
I think so. We're an export-driven state. We know we sell a lot to the Far East and China and other places like that in Europe. And to the degree China keeps and Japan keeps buying, we're in good shape. To the degree Europe remains in the dump, we're not. And right now I think there's a slow recovery going on. It's just that, we don't know whether the sovereign debt issues overseas and whether some glitch on the New York Stock Exchange is going to cause psychological damage to investors. And so we're just kind of waiting and hoping that things, settle out and that the economy comes back and we can get back to sufficient state revenues to run the state, because we all have huge budget holes we have to deal with in the next 2 years.
Certainly. Last question for you really comes from that, and that's the biography question. You came to this job from experience in the state legislature. I'm wondering about how the responsibilities transfer. What does having the legislative experience do for your perspectives as a regulator?
Well, first of all processes are give and take. And regulation is not a science, it's an art. There's a range of outcomes that could be right when you're regulating the utility. And the methodologies to reach there can be many. And the courts always judge it on your final results. In the legislative process, they've delegated to the state PUCs their rate-making authority to set rates for the monopolies they've granted. And that's why we're just like the legislature as PUCs. We do what they would otherwise do. So being a legislator and understanding that relationship, that they are our bosses, and the governor as well, and we do their bidding and try to do it the way they would like us to do it, is important. So you always got to make sure the legislators and the governors are on board generally what you're doing, that you implement those policies they give to you in the least cost, lowest risk way to the benefit of ratepayers, and at the same time being fair to the company so they can get adequate capital returns and exist in the financial markets.
Chairman Baum, thank you for visiting with Communicators.
Well, thank you very much, Susan. Appreciate it.
That was Ray Baum, the head of the Oregon Public Utility Commission. Also at the NCTA cable show was Carol Heavey with Time Warner Cable. She too spoke about broadband regulation and expansion, as well as her new responsibilities with Time Warner.
Your new title is a result of consolidation within the company, aligning you for the big growth we've got demonstrated here at the cable show. Could you explain to us a bit about what the thinking is with the new structure that you have in place inside the company?
We're aligning the company in 2 regions. And the purpose for that is really to simplify our structure so that we can be responsive to our customers and responsive to the marketplace and competition. Standardize our practices and some of our product offerings so that we can get quickly to market and make sure that we're being responsive to the customer's needs.
Well, speaking about customers, I've read that there's a new customer service survey coming out here at the show this week, and the results probably not surprising. Given all of the options available to consumers, this is the exact words, their fuse is getting shorter about customer service issues. How do you respond to that real competition in the customer service sector?
I think that we see that every day when we respond to customers. We know that the demands are great, and so we focus a lot of attention on making sure that we have the right resources, the right tools, the right training for our people so that we can be responsive and give customers the best possible service. So we're very focused on that.
But it's got to be more and more expensive to roll trucks as the technology and networking inside houses gets more complicated. So how do you find that right balance of cost containment, customer service that's important in your business today?
That's a really good question. I think that we have a lot of tools that allow us to do a better job than we ever have of serving customers in their homes. And so oftentimes we're able to solve a problem for a customer without going to the home. It's more convenient for the customer, and obviously there's a cost savings for us. We find actually that we're rolling on a percentage basis, we're rolling fewer trucks than we have in prior years because of some of the tools and the technology and just the upgrading that we've done with our cable networks. So the cost of customer service is a cost that pays back in additional products and services that customers will purchase. We believe it's a smart investment, and we invest where it's necessary and to the extent that it's necessary. But we also try to be smart about the way that we serve our customers.
You are coming to this job out of responsibilities in the Carolinas, and Charlotte especially, as the banking capital of the United States, was really in the epicenter of the financial meltdown. Can you give us a little economic snapshot of how that region is faring? Is there a sense that the economy is getting better based on the view from the Carolinas?
I would say that yes, things are definitely better than they were a year ago, for example. And Charlotte in particular did get hit fairly hard in the most recent recession. The Carolinas generally saw a decline, increased unemployment. We're starting to see some recovery from that. The housing market has started to pick up, which is good news for us and good news for North Carolina and South Carolina. So we're pleased to see that there are some signs that things are beginning to get better.
I was listening to the opening session yesterday, and one of the demographic shifts that seems to be happening is that they're economically based, and many more multi-generational family units that are being established. So people may be living differently as a result of this economy for some time. How are you planning for that?
I think that we are listening to our customers, understanding the needs that they have for products and services. Customers' lives are more complex and complicated and busier than ever. And so our products and services need to help them simplify their lives. We need to be able to respond with products and services that meet their needs, and we do that. We are doing that all the time, making sure that we're staying in touch with the needs of our customers and being responsive.
So as the housing structure changes, there might be new opportunities for business that there wasn't in the past.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and looking at the growth in broadband deployment, which has been in the last quarter, what do you see in 3 to 5 years? What's the shift of video to broadband? How is it all trending?
You know, I think what is really interesting to see, and it's especially true being here at the show and looking at some of the technology that's being developed, is that there's a convergence of what have been separate and distinct products for us. So video and data and voice are converging. So customers will get their video through a variety of sources, and we know that. And so we are preparing products to offer to customers that will allow them to do that, to meet those needs that they have. The other trend is mobility. And so we're involved in launching some wireless service in North Carolina and in other places in the country to respond to that need as well.
Carolinas have always seemed to be a beta site for Time Warner. Why is that?
I think there are a variety of reasons. We have an engineering presence there. We have our engineers are based in, a number of our engineers are based in Charlotte. So, we found that that certainly lends itself to Charlotte being a beta site, but it's also a great market. Customers are very responsive to products. They give us good feedback on products. We have a network of customers that we work with to get feedback as we beta test and trial different products. So this is something that we've built in the Carolinas, and it works very well for us.
How are you viewing broadband issues with regards to the more and more demand for all these applications and services here and your ability to deliver?
I think that we are looking at those demands, staying on top of those demands, and making the necessary upgrades to the networks. So over the next several years, we'll be upgrading the speed and the capacity of our networks. We do that on an ongoing basis. And so as customer demand increases over the next several years, we'll upgrade and do what's necessary to be able to respond and meet those needs.
Well, give me the pitch. Why are you better able to serve the needs of customers in your region than Verizon?
Well, Verizon doesn't have a presence in the Carolinas, but
yes, but as you move on to your
but
new
as I move on to my
responsibilities.
new role, they do. So our data service has the same capabilities, is faster, better, higher quality, I would say.
And so that the broadband will distinguish it with regards to video delivery, which is a new application for them. You've got a leg up, an advantage, do you think, over what they're offering?
I think that we do. I think that we have a history of providing video to customers. And so we are attuned to what the needs are, we're attuned to what the products are and what they need to be, and are responsive to that.
In all of our answers, a lot of what you've described keeps coming back to the people who work for you. So let me talk to you as an employer. It seems as though you're demanding more and more of the people who work for you in terms of their knowledge base. Are our schools graduating the kind of people that you are going to need to employ?
Well, unfortunately, I think most of us know that we do not have, we are not graduating the number of students that we need to have specialties in science, technology, engineering, and math, in STEM. And that's a concern across America. And it's certainly a concern for Time Warner Cable, as those are the future employees that we need to be able to hire. We need people with that skill set. And so in response to that, Time Warner Cable has actually introduced an initiative to support education around STEM through our Connect a Million Minds efforts across the country. And so we're focusing in every community that we serve on supporting schools and supporting young people and encouraging them to look at career opportunities and pursue career opportunities that focus on science, technology, engineering, and math.
In another area of employment, specifically hiring of women and women in technical fields, you've actually made a point of being a leader in this area, a mentor within the cable industry. Now, as an operations executive, you are not unique, but you're certainly in small numbers. Why is that, and where do you think the growth both in this industry and in technology nationwide will come?
I think that there are more and more women who are moving into operations, who have come into the onto the operations side and the technology side of the business. We have a lot of very bright and successful, capable operations executives, operations leaders, and engineering, female engineers. I think that there are enormous opportunities. It goes back to the previous question. There is a great need in this country, and there's a great need at Time Warner Cable for people who have expertise, who are trained in the technology field, and so it's a great opportunity for women to pursue those opportunities.
A couple of other questions about businesses. Time Warner has been on the forefront of its regional news services, going under some change in there, and you're thinking about how they're organized as well. What's happening?
Our regional news services have been overseen or structured in a way that was closely tied to the regions, and that's worked very well for us. I think one of the things that we've recognized as we've talked with customers, as we've observed what seems to resonate with customers, is that local programming, local news is of particular interest, and it has the potential and is in fact a differentiator for us. So we are aligning all of our local news operations so that they can take advantage of their specialty and their particular focus and particular response to customers. So they've all been moved into a structure where the local news divisions are managed in the news division.
As you move into your new responsibilities, what are you most excited about?
I'm most excited about learning about our customers in different parts of the country. So learning about the needs of customers in New York City, learning about the needs of customers in upstate New York and in Maine. And what's interesting is that while those are very diverse geographies, in many ways customers' needs are aligned. They tend to be the same, and so what's really exciting is to see where is that alignment and how can we really respond to customers and what things need to be different. So what things need to be different for a customer in New York City versus a customer in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's exciting to think about finding the right model for serving customers in that diverse geography.
How public do you expect to be?
How public do I expect to be? Well, I don't know. I would imagine that I'll be a bit more public than maybe I have been in the past, but my passion...
Moving into the biggest markets in the country.
My passion is really operations, and I love working with a team of people, responding to the needs of customers, and developing and introducing products that make customers' lives simple and easy. So that's really my focus.
Well, as you get started, thank you very much for visiting with Communicators, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Susan.
That was Carol Heavey with Time Warner Cable. You'll see more of these interviews over the next few months, but if you want to watch this program again or any one of our past Communicators programs, you can go to our website at cspan.org.
Coming up,